I'm Dr. Elaine Harper, but most just call me Elaine these days. After decades of saving lives, I now shuffle papers at a local hospital and consult the occasional greenhorn doctor. But today's not about any of that. Today, I'm preparing to meet Sarah, my son Michael's fiancée. While my usual place is being renovated, I'm holed up in this small, unassuming rental. It's nothing fancy, but it's cozy enough for a temporary spot. I decided to whip up my famous apple pie. Nothing wins people over like a homemade pie, right? The doorbell rang just as I pulled the pie out of the oven. Wiping my hands on my apron, I headed over to open the door. There stood Michael, looking as handsome as ever, and beside him, Sarah. She was as pretty as Michael had described, with a look about her that was both striking and, somehow, calculating. "Mom, this is Sarah," Michael introduced, his voice filled with pride. "Nice to meet you, Elaine," Sarah said, offering a hand that felt a bit too stiff. "Please, come in. I hope you're hungry. Pie's just out of the oven," I smiled, stepping aside to let them in. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes quickly scanning the modest living room and kitchen combo. I caught that little furrow in her brow as she took it all in, the second-hand furniture, the outdated kitchen cabinets, and the plain walls desperately in need of a paint job. "It's cozy," she finally said, a polite smile not quite reaching her eyes. "So, Elaine, Michael tells me you work at the hospital? What do you do there?" "Oh, just some administrative work these days," I replied, brushing off the real weight of my career. "No need to throw my achievements around." Michael shot me a surprised look. "Mom, why don't you tell her about?" I cut him off with a quick wink and began slicing the pie. "Never mind that. Let's have some pie. You'll love it, Sarah. It's my special recipe." As we sat down, Sarah seemed more interested in probing than eating. "So, how did you manage to send Michael to private schools and all? It must have been tough on just a hospital admin's salary." The question caught me off guard. It was too direct, too prying, and it irked me a bit. I steadied my voice. "Well, I had some help from my parents, a little nest egg they left me." I could tell she was sizing me up, trying to piece together how someone with a simple job had a son with such an upscale upbringing. Her questions felt more like an interrogation, each one delivered with a sharpness that was slightly disguised under a veneer of politeness. Michael, bless his heart, seemed oblivious to the tension. "Sarah's been great with all the tech support at her job. You should see her in action, Mom." "That's impressive," I said, turning to Sarah with a genuine interest now. "Technology really is the future, isn't it?" "It is. And it's so rewarding to be on the cutting edge, to be involved in something that really makes a difference," Sarah replied, her tone a mix of pride and something else I couldn't quite place. We continued to chat over pie, the conversation meandering from Michael's job to their wedding plans. I did my best to make Sarah feel welcome, despite the rocky start. As they left later that evening, Michael hugged me tight, but Sarah's goodbye was cool, her smile a practiced curve that didn't quite warm her eyes. As I washed the dishes, I made a mental note to keep a closer eye on things. Michael was my world, and I'd be damned if I let anyone mess with his happiness. After that first awkward meeting in my modest rental, I had hoped things with Sarah would smooth over. But as the wedding planning picked up speed, so did the tension between us. Sarah had a way of sidestepping my attempts at involvement with a sort of polite iciness that left me feeling outside of my own son's future. One afternoon, Michael and Sarah dropped by to discuss some of their wedding arrangements. I had made some coffee and set out a few snacks, trying to make the atmosphere as welcoming as possible. "Mom, we were thinking of picking a venue by the lake. What do you think?" Michael asked, spreading some venue photos across the coffee table. Before I could answer, Sarah chimed in. "Oh, Elaine, it's a bit out of the city. I'm not sure if some of our guests would appreciate the distance. We're thinking more of a downtown spot, right, Mike?" Her tone was casual, but her words cut me off before I could even weigh in. I tried to keep my voice even. "The lake sounds lovely, Michael. It'd make for beautiful photos, and a bit of a drive never hurt anyone." Sarah laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, but traffic can be such a headache. And we wouldn't want our guests spending half the day on the road. I bit my tongue on a sharper reply, instead forcing a smile. Well, downtown is nice too. Plenty of great places there. Michael looked between us, picking up on the tension, but not commenting on it. He always hated conflict, especially between the people he loved. Right, well, Sarah's been looking into some great downtown venues. Haven't you, babe? He said, giving Sarah a supportive smile. Absolutely, she replied, flipping her hair over her shoulder. And Elaine, we were also thinking of a modern theme for the wedding, very sleek, very elegant. I assume you'd prefer something more traditional? Her glance flicked over my dated coffee mugs and worn tablecloth, her words dripping with unsaid judgment. I clenched my jaw, feeling the sting. I like modern just fine, I said. The important thing is that you two are happy with it. That's sweet of you, Sarah said, her smile tight. We're just aiming for something a bit more current. It's all about the image, after all. As they continued to discuss details, I found myself nodding along, but my mind was elsewhere. Sarah's every word seemed designed to edge me out, to underline how little she valued my input or presence. After they left, the silence in my apartment felt heavy. I was used to being alone, but this felt different. This was isolation within my own family, a door being softly but firmly closed in my face. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. My heart was heavy with a mother's worry. I had always been the one Michael turned to, the one who helped him navigate life's choppy waters. Now, it seemed, Sarah was steering the ship, and she was taking him in a direction I wasn't sure I was welcome. Just have to watch and wait, I muttered to myself, taking a sip. But I'm not out of this game yet. Not by a long shot. It was Michael's birthday, and despite the cold chill in our relationship, I wasn't going to miss my only son's celebration. Sarah had taken the reins, organizing everything, and somehow, my invitation got lost in the shuffle. But a mother's place is at her son's side, especially on his birthday, so I went anyway. I arrived at Michael's house with a small, carefully wrapped gift in my hands. The place was bustling, laughter and music spilling out the door as I approached. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding in my chest. It was one thing to crash a party, another to crash your son's party uninvited. Sarah opened the door, her smile fading a bit when she saw me. Elaine, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. Wouldn't miss my son's birthday. Where's Michael? He's around somewhere, she said, stepping aside reluctantly to let me in. Well, come in, I guess. The house was decked out in blues and grays, a posh, modern look that screamed Sarah's touch. I moved through groups of people, none of whom I recognized. They were all Sarah's friends, young and trendy, the air filled with their laughter and the clinking of glasses. Finally, I found Michael, chatting with a group of people who looked to be colleagues from his work. Michael, I called out, my voice catching a bit. He turned, his face lighting up when he saw me. Mom, you made it. He excused himself and came over, giving me a big hug. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said, handing him his gift. Happy birthday, honey. Thanks, Mom. I'm so glad you're here. He looked genuinely happy, but there was a hint of confusion in his eyes, as if he was trying to figure out why I'd say such a thing. Sarah appeared beside us, her smile tight. Michael, your friends were asking about you, she said, then turned to me. Can I get you a drink, Elaine? No, thanks, I'm fine, I replied, feeling out of place with her polite but cold demeanor. As the evening wore on, I tried to mingle, but Sarah's friends were a tight-knit group, and I felt like an outsider. Every conversation felt strained, with Sarah often interjecting to steer Michael away or dominate the discussions with tales of her work accomplishments and plans for their future. At one point, I overheard her talking to a friend, her voice just loud enough for me to catch. Yeah, it's a bit awkward that she showed up. I didn't think she'd come, given, the vibe. The words were like a slap. I wasn't just uninvited, I was unwanted. My presence was making her uncomfortable, or worse, embarrassing her in front of her circle. The realization was a bitter pill, and I found myself retreating to a quiet corner, nursing a drink I didn't remember accepting. Michael found me a little while later, his brow furrowed. "Mom, are you alright? You seem a bit off." I forced a smile, not wanting to ruin his day with my feelings. "Just a bit tired, that's all. It's been a long day." "Do you want to stay longer, or would you like me to drive you home?" His concern was genuine, but the last thing I wanted was to drag him away from his friends. "No, you stay. Enjoy your party. I'll catch a cab," I said, standing up. "I just wanted to see you and wish you happy birthday in person." He hugged me, looking worried. "Thanks for coming, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, baby. Always." With that, I slipped out, the sound of laughter echoing behind me as the door closed. The night air was cold, but it was a relief compared to the warmth of a party where I was clearly an outsider. It was a crisp morning, just one day before Michael's wedding. I was in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound breaking the silence, when I heard a knock at the door. Expecting it might be the delivery, I wiped my hands on my apron and headed to answer. To my surprise, it was Sarah, standing there alone, her face set in a serious expression that didn't bode well. "Sarah, what brings you here this early?" I asked, managing a polite tone. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the modesty of my rented apartment with thinly veiled disdain. "Elaine, I'll get straight to the point. I'm here to make things easier for everyone. I have a proposal for you." "Oh?" I replied, curiosity piqued, despite the chill settling in my veins. She pulled an envelope from her sleek, oversized purse and held it out to me. "I'm offering you $1,000 to not attend the wedding tomorrow. We think it's for the best." I stared at her, dumbfounded, not from the shock of her audacity, but that she dared think this would be acceptable. "And why would you think I'd accept such an offer?" Sarah's lips twisted in a frown as she responded, "Let's be real, Elaine. Your presence might not mesh well with the kind of event we're planning. You know, with all the important guests coming." My hands clenched at my sides, but I knew I needed to handle this cleverly. "I'm sorry, I think I didn't hear you correctly," I lied, tapping my ear like I often did when I pretended not to hear something inconvenient. "You want to pay me to not attend my own son's wedding, because—" With a sigh of annoyance, Sarah repeated louder. "Because, Elaine, you don't exactly fit the scene. You dress and, well, everything about you, it's just not up to par. We have very influential people attending, and we can't have you there, looking like you do." She paused, perhaps expecting some kind of hurt or resignation from me, but I stood firm, my resolve hardening. "Keep going, Sarah. I'm listening. And with this money," she continued, waving the envelope, "you can maybe fix up this place or get something nice to wear some other time. You should be thankful I'm offering this." I nearly laughed at her nerve. She thought this apartment was mine and that I needed her charity to spruce it up. But I kept my expression neutral, nodded, and took the envelope. "All right, Sarah. If that's what you really want." Her relief was palpable as she gave a tight smile. "Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." After she left, I closed the door gently behind her, my hands trembling with a cocktail of anger and adrenaline. I took out my phone and stopped the recording. Her words, clear and unmistakably cruel, had been captured in full. I picked up my phone and dialed Michael, my voice urgent yet clear. "Michael, can you come over right now? It's important. We need to talk about something serious." "Sure, Mom, I'll be there as soon as I can." "Is everything okay?" His voice was filled with concern, and I could tell he sensed the gravity in my tone. "Just come, we'll talk when you get here." When Michael arrived, he looked worried. He barely sat down before I said, "Listen to this," and played the recording of Sarah's proposition. The color drained from his face as he listened, his expression morphing into one of shock and hurt. "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. I can't believe she'd say those things. He stammered once the recording ended. The wedding is tomorrow, Michael. What do you want to do? I asked, my voice soft but firm, needing him to make the next move. He ran his hands through his hair, a sign of his frustration and confusion. I want to confront her, tell her it's over, and cancel the wedding. I can't marry someone capable of this. I held up a hand, stopping him. If you do that now, everyone will see you as the bad guy, and she'll play the victim. We can't let her narrative control the story. Michael paused, taking in my words. So, what do we do? We need to show everyone her true colors. Let them see the Sarah I heard on this recording. My voice was calm, but carried the weight of my resolve. He nodded slowly, understanding the plan. Okay, Mom. I won't say anything to her yet. After Michael left, I made several phone calls to old friends and former patients, people who knew me well and had been part of my life thanks to the surgeries I'd performed over the years. We talked about old times, and I hinted at needing their support, though I didn't dive into specifics over the phone. Sitting back on the couch, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Tomorrow would be a significant day, one way or another. I was ready to defend my family's honor and show everyone the kind of person Sarah really was. It wasn't just about stopping a wedding, it was about protecting my son from a life of manipulation and deceit. The wedding day arrived with a mix of nerves and a heavy sense of duty. Today would be a turning point, one way or another. As guests settled into the beautifully decorated hall, whispering excitedly about the day's events, I prepared myself for what was arguably the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. The plan was simple but devastating. Just before Sarah and her father were to make their grand entrance, a video showcasing the couple's journey together was scheduled to play. Instead, I had arranged with the AV technician to play the audio recording of Sarah's cruel proposition. My heart pounded as the moment drew near, knowing all too well the impact of what was about to be heard. As guests chatted and looked forward to the start, I signaled to the technician. The lights dimmed, and instead of the soft opening music of the couple's video, Sarah's voice filled the room, clear and sharp. I'm offering you $1,000 to not attend the wedding tomorrow. We think it's for the best. You could hear the collective gasp, the murmur of confusion and shock as the guests processed the words. They looked around at each other, disbelief etched on their faces. Just then, the doors opened for what was meant to be Sarah's grand entrance with her father. The timing couldn't have been more poignant. The room fell into an uneasy silence as they walked in, her father unaware of the undercurrents, smiling and waving, while Sarah's smile faltered under the weight of dozens of eyes filled with sudden wariness and judgment. Without missing a beat, as they reached the front, I switched to the second part of my plan. The screen now showed a video montage of testimonials from prominent city figures, colleagues, and patients, all speaking to my years as a dedicated surgeon, the lives I'd saved, and my contributions to the community. The contrast was stark. Here was the proof of the life I had led, one of service and respect, directly countering Sarah's insinuations about my character and status. Sarah stood frozen, her face draining of color as the accolades rolled on. The guests, now completely turned against her, murmured amongst themselves, their expressions ranging from pity to disdain. Sarah's mother, sitting in the front row, had tears streaming down her face, her hands covering her mouth in shock. Sarah looked around helplessly, her earlier composure shattered. She had been exposed, her superficial judgments laid bare before the friends and family she had hoped to impress. As the revealing video ended, a hush fell over the room. It was a heavy silence, thick with the weight of revelations and shattered expectations. My son, Michael, took a deep breath and walked up to the microphone with a solemn expression. The room's attention was fixated on him, every pair of eyes filled with curiosity and concern. I'm very sorry, Michael began, his voice echoing through the quiet hall, that I didn't see the callousness and arrogance of my bride sooner. He paused, looking over the crowd with a regretful gaze. I am canceling the wedding, and I apologize to all of you for the inconvenience. He then turned to look at me, his expression softening. "Mom, I'm sorry. Thank you for everything you've done for me. Without you, I might have made the biggest mistake of my life." His voice cracked slightly, and my heart swelled with both pride and sorrow for what he was enduring. A murmur of support rose from the crowd, and a few guests stood up, applauding him for his courage. I felt a tear slip down my cheek as I watched my son, standing there, embodying the values I'd hoped to instill in him, a man of integrity and strength. At that moment, Sarah, who had been standing off to the side, burst into tears. "I didn't know about your mother's background," she sobbed, her voice desperate and pleading. "This changes everything. Please, Michael, can we just talk about this?" But Michael shook his head, his decision firm. "There's nothing left to discuss. It's over, Sarah." Even her own parents looked at her with a mix of shock and indignation, their expressions conveying their disappointment and disbelief at their daughter's actions. They had been caught in the uncomfortable position of witnessing their child's failings laid bare before a room full of guests. Seeing no way to salvage the situation, Sarah's frustration and embarrassment boiled over. "This is all your fault," she yelled at me, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. Her voice was raw, laden with emotion. "You've ruined everything." With those final words, she turned and ran from the hall, her sobs echoing behind her as the door slammed shut. The room was left in a state of shock, everyone processing the drama that had unfolded so unexpectedly. I moved to Michael's side, putting an arm around him. "You did the right thing," I whispered, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on us both. He nodded, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have gotten through this without you." As the guests slowly began to leave, offering quiet words of support or simply a squeeze of the shoulder, I felt a mix of relief and profound sadness. The day had not gone as any of us had envisioned, but truth and honesty had prevailed. Michael was hurt, but he was free from a future that could have been much more painful. After the storm had settled, I wrapped up the renovation of my house. It's beautiful now, a place filled with peace and light, much like the new chapter of my life. 2 years had flown by since that fateful day. Sarah, Michael's ex-fiancée, tried to reach out to me a few times, pleading for reconciliation. But after everything, how could I? I firmly told her no each time. Last I heard, she was fired from her job. Turns out her boss was at the wedding, saw everything, and wasn't too pleased. She moved out of the city afterward, and I don't know where she is now. In the meantime, life moved on in the best ways possible. I retired from my administrative role at the hospital, finally giving myself the break I deserved after years of service. Not long after, Michael met Anna. She's a breath of fresh air, a truly beautiful soul inside and out. They got married last spring, and it was the kind of wedding we'd always dreamed of, full of love, laughter, and genuine happiness. Anna respects me greatly, and our bond is strong. It's a relief and a joy to see Michael so happy and well-matched. Just the other day, over a quiet dinner at my place, Anna mentioned how much she values our relationship. "Elaine, I really admire how you handle everything with such grace. I'm so grateful for how welcoming you've been," she said, her sincerity touching my heart. "I'm just thrilled to have you in the family, dear. You make my son happy, and that's all I could ever ask for," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. Their kindness and love filled the house that had once echoed with too many silences. Now, it was a home in the truest sense, brimming with the promise of future gatherings and family milestones. Feeling lighter and more adventurous than I had in years, I recently made a decision that surprised even myself. I booked a trip around the world. I've always put it off, but now, with everything falling into place, it felt like the perfect time. When I told Michael and Anna, they were thrilled. "Mom, that's amazing. You've always talked about seeing the world," Michael said, his eyes lighting up. "Yeah, and you've more than earned it," Anna added, giving me a hug. "We'll manage just fine here. Go make some incredible memories." So, here I am, finalizing itineraries and packing bags, ready to explore the places I've only read about or seen in pictures. It feels like I'm not just traveling to different countries, but also towards a new phase of life, one where I can just enjoy and embrace the beauty of the world.